So just to give you a bit of an overbrief, a roadmap, we'll start talking about leadership. What is leadership? How does it affect you? Then we'll move into like resonance. What is this resonance? What are some of the key ideas behind it? I would like to talk about power stress because that's something that affects project managers and can lead to a lot of burnout. And hopefully I have some things that I can share with you that I found helpful that you can use in your career. So we all know what our hard skills are. We all know about our scope and our schedule and our budget. And we have to manage these things. We all know about the triangle, correct? But do we really believe that these are the things that lead to success? Being just able to manage these things doesn't always mean that we're successful. We know that cost, scope, and time, we're taught from the beginning that this is what a PM does. This is part of your job, is to keep these things in balance. But what research has shown us that just being able to do this does not mean you're going to be successful. It's really the soft skills that count. Now the hard skills, what I was just talking about, that comes from an old it's called the Tayloristic approach, is I have to measure everything. I need to have an index for everything. I need to be able, in order to control it, I have to be able to measure it. But what we're finding is that project managers that are truly successful are ones that are able to work with their teams and self-manage themselves. So it's really about the maturity of the project manager, the emotional maturity of the project manager. When we look at the failures, why projects fail, one of the things that we find that it's not those technical skills. They only contribute about 12%. What really is the project manager's ability to influence, negotiate, and to manage the expectations that are there. So when you look at the balance, you can see there's not truly a balance. And my next slide is really going to emphasize this for you. Now this is from the Standish Group. This is 2016. These are the top factors, they're in order, that have affected the success of a project. So at the beginning, executive sponsorship, 15%. If a project goes wrong, these are the things that typically are happening. The emotional maturity, this is emotional maturity of the team as well as the organization. User involvement. Are you talking with your key stakeholders? Does everybody know what's going on? 15%. Optimization is really about the organization itself. How well is your organization? Think of it, do they have a PMO? Do they have structure? Do they have business analysts? Do they have classes? Is everything optimized? And then your skilled resources contribute about 10%. But what's really eye-opening is the standard architectural management that goes mostly into processes, business processes. Modest execution would be, instead of rolling out, let's say I'm not rolling out something on the cloud globally, instead I'm rolling out an accounting system to maybe 10 people. So I'm doing something COTS right off the shelf to a small group of people. That's a modest execution. That's not a difficult thing to do. But look at what the project manager contributes. Look at how much influence we have, 5%, right? So if you don't even show up, have you really made a difference? You're only contributing 5%. But that's misleading, and I'm going to go back to where we were before, and I'll break it down for you. And then having clear business objectives. This is something that the organization itself should have. They should be able to have a clear vision of what it is they want you to do and what it is they want you to accomplish. So let's go back and look at this, because I think the project management expertise is more than 5%. Executive sponsorship. We had Payson Hall here, and he talked about how, as a project manager, to manage your executives. So that's really something that falls under the control of the project manager. You just need to have a technique, and you need to understand where the lever points are. So managing executive sponsorship, which contributes 15%, right? That's 15%, can affect the success, is actually something under your control as a project manager. You have that power. Emotional maturity. This is your emotional maturity as well as your team. So you also have the ability to influence others. And this is really what being resonant is about, is having that ability to bring out the best in other people, to have your team excited, to have them motivated. They want to come in, they want to work for you. And a lot of that ties back to your ability to manage your own emotions. And we'll talk about that. And then user involvement. Are you reaching out to the stakeholders? Are you communicating to other people? Do the people above you understand what you're doing? Are you able to market that? How many people have a change manager on their projects? You have a change manager for your project's pretty big. I have a change manager too. My change manager does all of my messaging. He does the newsletter, he talks with all of the agencies, he makes sure that everybody knows what we're doing. I'm practicing what's called radical transparency. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Ray Dalio's philosophy. He's a billionaire hedge fund manager who started from nothing. And one of the things that he says is to be totally transparent. They practice radical transparency. So I want everybody to know what I'm doing. I want to communicate with the stakeholders. I want to make sure the team knows what we're doing. Have you ever been in a meeting where it was obvious that some people didn't know what was happening, that they didn't understand the purpose and intent of the project? So this is one of the things that we can do. And then optimization is actually, there's a little that you can do to influence, but it's totally within the organization. And your skilled resources as a PM, if you see a deficiency in someone on your team, you can help that person. You can either have somebody coaching them, you can have somebody working with them, you can give them bite-sized pieces to work on. You can task them, give them daily tasks. As the PM, we've gone over now 60–70% of what is under your control. So 60% of what's happening on that project, these things that can lead to failure, are actually things that you as a PM have direct influence over. Does that make sense? You guys have any questions on that? So it's not just 5%, that's misleading. It's much more than that when you look at the overall picture of it. So let's talk about leadership. Is a project manager a leader? Do you consider yourselves as project managers? Are you leaders? So 30% in performance is a result of the variability as a performance of leadership, right? 70% of initiatives, of all initiatives, don't succeed due to people issues. We already saw that earlier with the Standish report. 30% of the time, poor leadership is the reason that people leave. You call it firing your boss. Have you ever been working in a place where, have you ever worked in a place where it was difficult to bring people in because the environment was so toxic? And it was usually started, it was allowed and it was permitted by the people that were in the power structure. So 30% of that, of the time, people are leaving. You're losing talent. You're losing good people because you're not able to retain them. And then 20% of superior leadership capability is, and your earned income goes by 20%. So when I pitch this to corporations, I'm quick to point out that having someone who is resonant, and we're going to talk about that, what does that mean, resonant? It improves their profitability by 30%, and it's been shown. And productivity goes up on the team by 20% as well. So if you have everybody on your team working at their best, you get a synergy there that's not always possible when they're not. When you have people that you have to drag along, you're constantly doing one-on-ones, right? I've had issues like that where I have to have a meeting with the person before the meeting because when they got in the meeting, they would start agitating. So you have to kind of manage them as well. So all of these things can translate into lost time, lost productivity for your company. And it's not a good idea when there's tools that we can use that will help us. So resonance is really about being effective as a leader. It's about managing your emotions. It's about setting boundaries. It's about inspiring people. It's about getting commitment and getting buy-in. But before you can do any of that, you have to be able to self-manage. And one of the things that project managers, it's called power stress. And we'll get into that. It's basically from being isolated, because you are in a leadership role, and it does isolate you. And it causes sometimes feelings of loneliness, and alienation can occur too. So what is emotional intelligence? I've done a little bit of research on it, and the simple answer is it's just the ability to manage your emotions. It's the ability, when you have a stimulus, to stop and think about how you want to respond. That's basically it. You only have 6 emotions. And everything else that you feel is really is a mixture of those emotions. But as human beings, we have an ability that other mammals don't. We have the ability to stop and think about what direction we're going to go in. So if you do have a problem on the team, instead of you have somebody challenging you, instead of trying to work challenging them back, you can stop, you can think about what is the best way for me to be successful as a project manager. The goal is to help the person on your team. This is called, it's a new form of leadership. It's called relationship-based leadership, and they're doing a lot of studies on this. And they found that it's very effective not only for the project manager's mental health, but for the mental health of the project team, because everybody wants to be treated with respect. Everybody does. So EI, emotional intelligence, is really about self-awareness. It's about being able to manage those relationships. One of the things that I really wanted to get into, but I don't have time, is talking about how project managers have to have a little help too. Certain emotions that trigger painful things, one of them is rejection. So they did this scientific experiment where it was called an experiment. They would bring this person in, and they would be sitting in a room, and they would be 2 other people in the room. And they'd pick up a ball, and they would start tossing it back and forth, right? And then they would toss it to the 3rd person, and they would toss it back. And then eventually, the 2 people would turn away from the 3rd person and toss the ball between themselves. And at that point, they would bring that 3rd person in for an interview, and they would ask them how you feel. And the person would say, I'm very uncomfortable emotionally. And what they were looking for is the feelings of rejection. So they said, okay, well, let's try a different thing. We'll tell them that these were really bad people. They were involved in neo-Nazism, or they would say, okay, now how do you feel that these people were, rejecting you? And the person said, I still feel bad. So they did MRI scans, and what they found is that when you feel rejected, right, and as PMs we deal with this a lot, right, that pathway in your brain is the same neurological pathway as pain. So you do feel pain. And they gave the person an aspirin, and they felt better. They were like, not great, don't take an aspirin when you feel bad. But so rejection, which is kind of a part of what we do, not everybody accepts the direction we want to go. People push against it. Sometimes you do feel a little ostracized. You have to imagine that this is the reason that you have such intense feelings is because it's in the pain side of your brain. It goes along the same pathway. And one of the things that I wanted to add in here and didn't have a chance to was a slide that talks about how to deal with that. A lot of people think you can do self-affirmations. No, not always. Those don't work. The thing to do when you have these feelings, when you feel rejected, when you feel like you're not being valued, is to sit down and write down the things that you know are true about yourself. I'm a good listener. I'm a very organized. You sit down and you write these things out. You have to think them through, and you really do actually have to write them down, because that triggers something in the brain. And that brings you back to a normal place. Being resonant means you're balanced. When you're dissonant, you're in a different place. You're not balanced, you're not thinking, you're not focusing. You're dealing more on the emotional side. So we're going to do a checkpoint. I'm going to see if you guys were listening. Okay. So read your questions. A, it says resident leaders, A, they have empathy for team members experiencing personal problems. They tend to create harmony within a group and influence even in challenging work situations. They are seen by the teams they are leading as caring, equally for the person as well as their job performance. All of the above. All of the above. My change manager helped me put this together. He's like, don't have a wrong answer. Make sure it's really simple. Make it easy for everybody. So now we're going to get to the fun part. Resonance versus dissonance. So you can think of resonance as working more on the people side. Think of dissonance as more the old McGregor XY. I don't know if some of you remember that theories of X and Y. So the dissonant leader is very authoritative. You will do this. I want this on my desk at 9 o'clock. No excuses. And I don't want to hear about any of your issues, right? Resident leader is has more empathy. They care about the person as much as they do the project. I've worked for 2 PMs like that were really focused not just on getting it done, but more about, are you okay, bringing you along, developing you as a PM, and making sure that you were okay. We're going to do a scenario next. We're going to see if you guys are resonant. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Let's do 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So Jessica's going to be odd. Jessica, you're going to be an odd man. You're going to make up the 4th of 3. Okay, so here's your scenario. You guys are going to tell me what the proper response is for this. Okay, so Linda's a project manager. She's on a large acquisition project. She's reviewing the final presentation. She's got a phase gate meeting. So phase gate is where you go in, you show what you've done. The executives say, yeah, it looks good, or they say, no, you need to go back. We see some issues here. So she has a phase gate meeting that's coming up. It's at 8 a.m. in the morning, right? It's 5:30. She's in her office like a good PM. She's doing all her little dotting her I's and crossing her T's. Engineering calls. Guess what? The original cost estimates were wrong. They didn't take into account the fact that the servers were reaching end of life and they would have to be replaced. And so this is going to be a massive cost. So what are we going to do? So William, he's a highly skilled technical analyst. He's been working for her for a long time, right? He's been putting in a lot of hours. William also happens to be the single parent, and he has a child with special needs. Now, his parents are coming in that night. They're flying in that night because it's his son's birthday. So what are you going to do? Okay, so you guys are going to split up into groups of 3. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and then I want to hear what solutions you come up with. I was going 1, 2. Which is it easier for you guys to go across, or? I'm going to let you self-organize. Yes. Okay, we'll start at the top. All right. Which group? We're going to start at the front, and then we're going to work our way back. So who's going to be the spokesperson? Who has the solution? Okay, hold on. So you said what?
Oh, I said I would go to the party, the birthday party. No, but we had a lot of different decisions. We would have like different options, variables for executive management. Let them know that there's going to be a change, and then maybe touch base with the analyst first thing in the morning to make sure we get all the details exactly what the change is, what's causing the change in the budget. So.
That's a good answer. What's this group over here? Okay, what was your solution?
So we all agreed that no way would we bother William because there is always more. There is always more crisis. We would either look to do the work ourselves if we could quickly or postpone the meeting. But there is always another crisis in the making.
And if you
So
do the
balance.
work yourself, it's a matter of just updating William before the meeting. Hey, you know what? I didn't want to interrupt you last night with your, family event. This is what happened. This is the direction we decided.
Very resonant answers. I don't know if this will reach all the way. Steve, will it reach back? Okay. Well, I can repeat what they said. Okay, you guys are gonna have to. Okay, so we need you guys. You're gonna have to come up here and speak. Who's next?
Our team's version is to have a 10-minute conversation with William after he's had the family affair and the party. Later in that evening, we'll have a 10-15-minute call with William, explain what we perceive as a change in or wrong assumptions that we made, and get his view on what the impact, on how much of a difference the presentation would be. Because we feel like either making him to come in or we're trying to do it ourselves, the data that's presented in the final presentations is not going to be accurate without more heavy, probably, analysis. So we just want to get a high level of understanding of here's what we think is an incomplete or inaccurate assumption. How much of that changes our presentation, and use that as sort of a disclaimer at the beginning of the presentation and continue on. Knowing that based on this new information, we will send accurate data to the executive team and all the key stakeholders later in the day or a couple days later, right? Go with that.
How about my teams back here? Now you guys may have to come up.
So we all got congealed together because we're amazing.
All right. Oh, it's a group. Okay. Team of. Did they even see? They have a team name, guys.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so Okay, so the first thing we thought about was trying to reschedule the meeting in the morning. That could be a possibility. The second thing was working with William to see what time his party ended, to see if he could give us the information after the party. If not, the third thing we thought of is who is his backup. Every good project team should have a backup that can give you at least 80% of the information before you give the presentation. And then in the morning, if it wasn't William, we could present the backup's information until we got more details.
Okay, so you guys had some good answers, good resonant answers. So the one thing that you wouldn't do is to try to, if you have a phase gate meeting, I've worked for some big corporations, it takes months to put those together with those executives. I worked for the vice president of global power, just to get on the calendar. Sometimes you're talking 3 months before you can even get on there. So what the PM did was she called him. She said, this is what's happening. And he said, oh, okay, I know what I have to do. I know I'm going to come in early in the morning and fix it. And she was like, okay. So they resolved that. He came in early. He spent the evening with his son and his parents. And then in the morning he came in. He fixed the report before the meeting, and they were able to have the meeting. So it was a win-win. So that's the beauty of resonance, is that everybody wins and everybody walks away feeling positive. So now we'll talk about how you get there. I've talked a lot about what it does for people and how important it is, but how do you get there? The sacrifice syndrome is something that happens when you're in a position. It happens to executives too. It's not just project managers. When you're in a position where you have a lot of responsibilities and you're being asked to be in a leadership role, right? And one of the warning signs that you're falling into the sacrifice syndrome is when you need to have a drink to unwind, when you need to have coffee to get you going because you're emotionally exhausted, when you're not really taking pleasure in life. You're doing things, but you're not doing the things that you used to enjoy. You don't enjoy them as much. Your emotions are somewhat dull, right? So the whole sacrifice syndrome, physically you start feeling a little tired, a little worn out, and that's because you're putting out, but you're not. The whole idea of resonance is that you're getting something back, is you're not replenishing yourself. You're not doing those things that you need to do to bring you back to normal. You're depleted, basically. You're depleted emotionally, you're depleted mentally. And you see that sometimes. You see when people, they're coming in early, they're staying late, they're working through, and the longer you do that, the less productive you become, actually. You'll sit there and then you're writing a report and then 2 hours have gone by and you've only done 3 or 4 paragraphs. It's because you're in that sacrifice syndrome state. So the whole idea is these are the inputs that go in effective leadership, right? Into the sacrifice syndrome. You come in effective, you're fresh, you're ready. You know you're going to run this project. Crises begin to occur. So you're putting out fire after fire after fire. You're not getting support from your leadership. You're feeling isolated. You're not getting the proper response from people. And then in come threats. Oh, you're not getting this done. Well, we're going to have to cut this and we're going to have to cut that, and we're really disappointed in you. And what comes out of the sacrifice syndrome is very ineffective or non-sustainable leadership. Because you can't deal with all of that and still be effective. You begin to drain and wind down. So project stress, it does affect your productivity. And right now, the world that we live in is 24/7, right? I've been on global projects where I'm up early in the morning, so I can be on call with Africa, and then I'm late at night, so I can be on call with China, and then I'm tired because I'm not getting enough sleep, which affects my judgment. It's all about being able to manage these things. Virtual teams have really changed the game for us. It used to be everybody was in and you could look over, the cubicle and you could have conversations with people. But now you may have someone, in Prague that you're trying to have a conversation with, and customs get in the way. Things that you say get in the way. The language gets in the way. There's a lot of barriers that PMs 20 years ago, it was just not done. So what happens over time is when you're under all of this stress, when you're trying to solve all of these problems, you fall into task dropping. Your decisions are not always good decisions. And your attention span tends to drop as well too. It's really hard for you to keep your train of thought. When you start experiencing these things, you're falling into the sacrifice syndrome. So stress is not a bad thing. Stress is actually a good thing up until a certain point, right? When you're stressed to get something done, you start thinking for creative ways to do it. You get excited about it, but if the stress continues, you reach a point where you're not effective anymore and your creativity begins to fall off. And then sometimes it can actually affect your health. You can start having ulcers, you start having headaches, you're not sleeping well. It's because your body can't recover back from all of the stress. And it can lead to heart attack, if not death, at some point, if it becomes severe enough, if you don't get yourself out of the situation. So power stress is one of the things that executives go through, PMs go through, and it is manageable. It really is manageable. A lot of the emotions that a CEO feels, because everyone is looking to the CEO for direction, they're feeling it. Everybody, just as everybody looks to the PM for direction. Whether you're program manager or project manager, you're leading a team. And people are looking for your assistance and your guidance. So here we go. This is, nobody, you don't have to answer this out loud. But here you are. Do you inspire others? Are you inspirational? Have you created a positive work environment for people? As much as you can, right? Do you demonstrate compassion for yourself? Do you take a day off when you need a day off? Do you do that for yourself? Do you understand yourself? Do you understand the broader environment that you're working in? As a PM, you have to be aware of the environment that you're working in. You have to be aware of the cultural norms that you're working in. I'm working on a government contract, and that caught me the first time, was the cultural norms I didn't understand. But I figured them out, and I know how things are now, so I'm working more within that area. Sometimes I fall into dissonances too. I know what it takes to pull myself out of it, though. So this is from Ray Dalio. And he's basically saying, you know, that you come a point in your life where you have to make a decision. You know, it's so painful that you're either going to do what you need to do to become better, or you're going to continue with the status quo. You can tell I like Ray Dalio. So remember the pull, that sacrifice syndrome on one side where it leads to ineffective and non-sustainable leadership. But on the other side is renewal. And how you get there is through mindfulness, hope, and compassion, basically. And that leads to sustainable, effective leadership and resonant relationships with your project team. So there's two cycles that occur. If you can break out of that sacrifice and move over into the renewal cycle, that's where you get the energy to go back in and do what you need to do. So mindfulness, I know everybody's thinking, I'm not going to sit on a rock and meditate, right? I'm not going to sit there. I don't want to do this. But it doesn't have to be that. Actually, mindfulness can be so simple as just having a journal, just writing down your thoughts. If you like to play tennis or golf, maybe going out and playing tennis or golf. It's really about having supportive relationships around you, people that encourage you, people that you can go to. That's the whole purpose of mindfulness, is to get you centered, is to pull you out of those demands that are made upon you and let you kind of heal yourself. So hope. Hope is having a clearly articulated set of goals. I know what I want to do. I know what done looks like. If I can just get my team to follow me. And I'm going to illustrate that with a story. Has anybody ever heard of Florence Chadwick? You've heard of Florence Chadwick, yes. Florence Chadwick, 1952, decided she was going to swim from the Catalina Islands to the coast of California. It's about 24 miles. Now, she'd already swam the English Channel. She held the record at that time. She held the men's record, actually, for a long time. And so this was going to be her coming to America, and she got in the water. It started out very early in the morning. She got in the water. There's 2 boats on each side because there's sharks in the water in California. So they were there to keep the sharks away, and they were there to pull her out of the water if she got too tired. She swam about 15 hours, and this heavy fog came in, and she couldn't see. She couldn't see anything in front of her. She swam another hour, and she finally raised her hand, I have to be taken out of the water. So they took her out of the water. She got in the boat. Her mother was in one of the boats as well. And they wrapped a blanket around her, and she said, how far did I get? And nobody said anything. So finally her mother told her, honey, you were a mile from the shore. And she said, it's because I couldn't see it. I didn't have vision, right? This is about hope. I couldn't see the shore. I couldn't pitch. So she went back, she trained, and then 2 months later, she went back out and she swam. Same thing, she got into the water, and within a few hours, this heavy fog came in. But this time she didn't stop. And she made it all the way down. And she came out of the water, and her reporters, they were all around her. They were like, how were you able to do this? And she said, as I was swimming, what I did was I kept a mental image of the shore in my mind. And I could see it. I could see it. And that's what hope is about. So when you're on these projects, and we've all been on these like killer projects, like everything's going wrong, right? No matter what even if you do something right, it goes wrong. I know you know what I'm talking about. Or you're having problems with your team. There's a lot of contention. Nobody's getting along. This person won't talk to that person. And so information is getting dropped and things are not getting done. I had a programmer, I had to have him daily report to me because he was just not being productive. So every day I had a list of things for him to do, right? But finally, I said, okay, I'm going to try something different. So I went into this thing of, all right, I'm going to have a vision of what done looks like and where we're going to be and how great it's going to be, and I'm going to talk that up. I'm going to communicate that. And this is where my second example comes in. Now, I know you guys have heard of this guy, Shackleton. Everybody's heard of Shackleton, right? Kind of, sort of. All right, so Ernest Shackleton was an explorer. And he was on this, it was a scientific exploration in Antarctica. They set out, they got almost there, and this heavy ice came in, right? Shackleton was a great explorer, but he wasn't that good at looking at, polar ice patterns. So the ship got caught in the ice, and then the ice began to crush the ship. So he had 27 men with him. And they decided there's water coming in the ship. We gotta abandon ship here. So the guys got out. They got their lifeboats and they started pulling them along the ice. Now, pulling a lifeboat on the ice is not like an ice rink. What you don't see is there's 3 men that are in front of them with ice picks, trying to smooth the ice down so that you don't tear a hole in your boat. These are the conditions that these men were under. During that time, Shackleton was a leader. Anything that his most important thing was taking care of his people. And he let them know how important they were. One guy lost his gloves. Shackleton said, here, take mine. He said, no, I won't do it. He said, either you take my gloves or I'm going to throw them in the water, right? So they realized after a while they were waiting for help. They were waiting for spring. It wasn't coming, and they were running out of food. So Shackleton said, we're going to take one of the boats. We're going to try to make it to a nearby island. Who's going to go with me? Every single man raised his hand. The possibility of getting back was nil. Every single man said, I will go with you. So Shackleton and his guys, they went, they finally got to land, but they landed on the wrong side of the island. They had to go over a mountain to get to the other side of the mountain. But all that time, he was upbeat, he was a leader, he kept his men, he kept their hope going, he gave them that vision. He told them, we're gonna get back, just stick with me. And he finally was able to go back and get his men, the other 22 men that were still there. So why do people still talk about Ernest Shackleton? Obviously, if he was a project manager, he would have been fired. He never got to where he was supposed to be. He never hit his first milestone, right? He never did. He didn't even get to the starting point. He was supposed to get to the starting point, and then he was supposed to go over the ice by sled. But yet, they teach this in Ivy League schools. He is an example of what a leader should be. He is an example of somebody who was able to take that hope, that Florence Chadwick, that I can see the vision, and he was able to share it with his team. He was able to encourage them and motivate them. There have been movies about him. There have been books written about him. He is considered one of the greatest leaders. And his primary focus was always about making sure that his men stayed positive and that he kept feeding them that vision of we're going to make it and we're going to get back home. So that's what we as project managers, maybe not so dramatic, right? I'm just using a lot of dramatic, but really As project managers, that's what we're doing. We're providing a vision of what done looks like. This is what's going to happen when we're done, and this is how we're going to get there, and here's what we're going to do to overcome any obstacles. So does everybody kind of understand this is very key. So if you guys have questions, please ask them, because I really want you to understand this portion of it. Okay. How are we doing on time? Okay, all right. We can't do the last exercise then, unfortunately. I want to talk about, remember I said the third part is compassion. And compassion is feeling empathy for somebody, especially somebody that is different from you. You know, I was raised with a certain idea of what soldiers in Vietnam did, and I had all of these negative attitudes. And I overcame that, right? I began to understand. Once I met some Vietnam veterans at a dinner for the mayor in Houston, and I got to talk to them and realize a lot of the things that I thought were wrong. And you right now probably have people on your team that you think are a real pain. But if you could understand them, if you knew their backstory, if you would just sit down and talk with them, you would be amazed at what some people are carrying with them every day. You would be amazed that they're even functioning. And that's what compassion does for you. Compassion is really necessary because you need to understand the needs of your team. You need to understand what it is that's driving them. Otherwise, you can't motivate them. So you need to have honest dialogues with them and talk to them. And it's really important when you have people that are the exact opposite of you. I have somebody on my team now, they can't make their deadlines. When they do, their deliverables are terrible. You have to redo them. They're unhappy, they're always grumpy, they're always complaining. And so I have to figure out, how do I motivate this person? How do I get them engaged with the rest of us? I've tried some different things, and I'm still working on it. There's no perfect answer. I'm not here to sell you this magical elixir. If you just become resonant, all your problems will go away. I'm just here to share with you a strategy that you might be able to use that could be helpful. Okay, so how do we get there? Well, we have to do it with intentional change. That's diet, that's exercise, mindfulness. It doesn't have to be meditating, just some peaceful time with yourself. Relaxation, limiting that caffeine is really important. I think I was drinking maybe 10 cups of coffee at one point a day, and it was not good for me, and it was not good for the people around me. Well, maybe we can fit it in. So here's a couple of things that you can do. You can have some family time, a little exercise. I don't do marathons anymore because my knees can't take it. And then, of course, you could always join PMI and go to our wonderful little outings that we have for our volunteers as well. So we had a really good time at the park. It's good to be with other project managers. It really is. I got to sell this. I got to sell PMI, right? PMI has been good to me. So here's your checkpoint. Let's see if you guys know what dissonant is. I think you all know the answer to this one. So dissonant leaders are emotionally distant and socially from their employees, right? We've all worked for that PM that goes in and closes the door. You don't see them. Their logic, they're very fact-based. Think Mr. Spock, right? They're often perceived as cold and aloof, and people used to tell me that they thought I was cold and aloof, and they felt uncomfortable talking with me. I'm working on that. Generate feelings of burnout among their teams. Their people get tired. Or E, all of the above. It's a simple one. It's E. So effective leaders, they develop a sense of purpose by pursuing goals that align with your personal values. It has to align with what you believe to be of value, or it's not going to work, because you can't sustain it. It has to come from within you. So it has to be aligned with your philosophy. Okay, maybe we can, how much time we got? Can we fit this one in? Because this one's fun. All right, this one's fun. So we have Joseph. He's a nephew of an executive, right? And that you're delivering a project for. So you have an opening on your team, and guess what? So the executive has inquired several times, have you interviewed Joseph? Have you talked to Joseph? Okay, well, you looked at Joseph's resume and you're like, no, doesn't have the qualifications, and you've got a really tight deadline. You can't pull some projects. You can pull the dead weight. You know, you got a healthy budget, you got a healthy team. Some projects you can't because you're like running bare minimum. Okay, so here you go. So this particular executive that wants you to hire Joseph, it's got a lot of power. He can really affect your career. So you're gonna have to think about this one. Okay, and so and your budget's tight. You can't bring in extra people to kind of boast Joseph up. So what are you gonna do? You guys have 5 minutes to think about it. This one should be pretty easy. then I'll trip Izzy coming out. Time's up? Okay, all right, you guys. All right, team. How are you? Are you there? Team Awesome. Okay.
Tracy, all the information.
Come on, Tracy.
All the information on this one.
Okay, Tracy. I'm coming up. You're going to have to. What have you been shy? You've never been
When
shy.
have I been shy? Yeah.
You've never been shy. Okay, what are you going to do about this guy?
Okay, so we decided that we would have the project team do a panel interview and then make recommendations with pros and cons to the executives.
Ooh, nice. All right, you guys.
We need a vision for success and then share that vision. So if you have a qualified candidate and Joseph, you take those two resumes to the executive in a one-on-one offline and say, here's my vision for success, and this is what it takes to make the project successful. And then you have to trust the executive to give you the correct support.
And you've been doing your executive stakeholder management, so you probably.
Yeah, so it's visibility, a vision for success, share your vision, be visible.
Okay, I like that. Okay, this group. What you guys come up with? Who's my spokesperson?
So decided to kind of go with a diplomatic approach. Thank him for making you aware of his nephew as a potential candidate, but be upfront and forthright and let him know that, you know, he just doesn't seem to have the qualifications, but that we'll definitely keep him in mind for future opportunities.
Okay. Oh, here's our spokesperson. Come on, spokesperson. What did you guys come up with?
So basically, we said that resumes don't always tell the truth about true qualifications on a person. You could have, Joseph could be a total barista, but if he has the drive and the vision that you have, he could totally make a good team player and be good to the team and learn. And it's a learning opportunity for him and you. And, you know, just bring Joseph in, talk to him, find out exactly, you know, what he has, and if he's interested, you know, and it has the same vision and desire to learn, then it's not, you probably have some small stuff you can give him to start out with.
So let me tell you what the PM did. Right, the PM, no, they did not. But what they did was they brought Joseph in for a panel interview. And they gave him the hardest questions that they could come up with. And by the end of that interview, he no longer wanted the job because he realized he wasn't qualified. So, okay, so you guys, I didn't think you were going to do it, but you did it. So that's all I have. We're going to load these slides up on where you guys can access them. Is that right, Jessica? Where's Jessica? Jessica, we're going to put the slides out there for people if they want to download them. Okay, because there's like links, there's books, and there's one link to a place where you can test to see if you are resident. You can go out and take this test to see how resident you are. And there's some emotional intelligence websites, and I've checked them so the URLs are all good. You guys have been so much fun. This was fun. You guys are much more fun than London. London was vicious. No, you can't put that in there. You cannot put that in. We're going to have to erase that piece. But no, thank you so much, and we really appreciate you guys coming out. Jessica, do you want to close out?